Okay, let's dive right into this, because today we are tackling one of the most profound mysteries in all of human history. How did the first king actually become king? I want you to take a second and just imagine a vast world, entirely devoid of presidents, governments, police, borders, and most importantly, completely devoid of kings. We're talking about a time when literally no one was born with a crown on their head, and no army belonged to a single ruler. So how exactly did humanity go from these small Roman groups of people just living together to a world where thousands and eventually millions would just obey a single person?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? I mean, who was the very first person to actually stand up and say, hey, I am your king? We really have to wrap our heads around the fact that humanity didn't just suddenly invent monarchy overnight. It wasn't like the first king woke up one morning, threw on a shiny crown, and started barking orders at his neighbors. It was this incredibly long, complex experiment with power, and the crown itself, well, that was actually the very last piece of the puzzle.
To truly grasp how this happened, we have to look at the sheer scale of time involved here. For the first 2 million years of our existence, human beings lived in these small bands or villages that were completely 100% autonomous. 2 million years. That is a literally unimaginable stretch of time, where we had absolutely no bosses, no crowns, and certainly no centralized government collecting your taxes or drafting folks for war. Section 1. A world without kings. The 2 million year era of autonomy.
So, let's map out exactly how we move from those wandering autonomous tribes to highly structured states. When we look at the timeline of history, for those 2 million years, things were pretty static. But then, right around 5000 BC, things suddenly start speeding up. Villages begin to aggregate, clumping together into much larger political units. By 4000 BC, this rapid acceleration actually leads to the formation of the very first states. We start seeing major unified kingdoms pop up, like Dynasty 0 in Egypt around 3320 BC, and rulers like Enme-Barajesi in Mesopotamia by 2600 BC. Basically, the sheer pace of human aggregation created this sudden, almost desperate need for large-scale organization.
Section 2. The Mythological First King. Legends from the Dawn of Time.
Okay, before we get into the hard archaeological facts of those early states, we really need to look at the myths. If you look at ancient Mesopotamian tradition, specifically this fascinating document called the Sumerian King List, they actually name the very first king. His name was Alulim. Now, the legend says he ruled the ancient city of Eridu, which held huge symbolic importance. But Alulim wasn't just, a guy with a big axe who took over by brute force. The text claims he was appointed directly by the gods, specifically En, Enlil, and Enki. And his job, he was literally chosen to act as a shepherd to early humanity, because at that time, humans were believed to behaving in this almost animalistic, wildly chaotic manner.
And you want to know the absolute most incredible detail about Alulim? According to that Sumerian King List, he reigned for a mythological 28,800 years. Yeah, no way, right? This was all supposedly before a great legendary flood. Now, obviously, modern Assyriologists consider Alulim to be a fictional mythological figure. But his legend is absolutely crucial because it shows us exactly how early civilizations wanted to view the origin of their leaders, as something ancient, completely divine, and, well, superhuman.
Section 3. Discovering the Real Kings. From Myth to Archaeological Reality.
Now, what's really interesting about this transition from mythology to reality is figuring out who the real guys were. If Alulim is just a myth, who is the first real ruler we can actually prove existed? Well, in Egypt, historians point to what we call Dynasty 0. This is basically the chronologically earliest known unified kingdom of Upper Egypt. The very first ruler whose reign we can tangibly, physically see in the historical record is the person buried in Tomb Uj at Abydos, dating all the way back to around 3320 BC. And this perfectly illustrates the stark contrast between myth and reality. We go from these mythological kings like Alulim, guys supposedly ruling for tens of thousands of years by direct divine appointment, to actual historical proven kings. Over in Mesopotamia, the first ruler from those legendary king lists to finally step out of the fog of myth and be confirmed by hard physical archaeology is a man named Enme-Barajesi. He ruled the city-state of Kish around 2600 BC, and we know for sure he was real because we literally found his name scratched onto fragments of ancient vases.
Let's look a bit closer at Enme-Barajesi, because he wasn't just some ceremonial figurehead. The guy was a serious power player. He led a massive, highly successful military campaign against the land of Elam, but he also completely understood how to play politics through religion. He's credited with building the Temple of Enlil, who is the chief god of the Sumerian pantheon, in the sacred city of Nippur. By stepping up and becoming the patron of the most important god's temple, he brilliantly elevated himself way above all his rivals. Plus, he was the father of Aga, who is the famous rival to the legendary Gilgamesh. The translation of Baraji's name is just fascinating. It literally means the priest who permeates the throne. Think about that. The crucial point here is that right from the very beginning of recorded history, we see this deliberate, undeniable fusion of political, military might, and religious authority. Section 4. Forging the Divine Right, the Ideology of Inequality.
So, you might be wondering, how exactly do you convince thousands of people to just build your giant monuments and go fight your wars without constantly rebelling against you? Well, you do it through a concept that would echo throughout the rest of human history, the divine right of kings. This is a political and religious doctrine asserting that a monarch is accountable to absolutely no earthly authority, no parliament, no aristocracy, no people. Their right to rule comes directly from God. This meant that to challenge the king wasn't just a political crime or treason, it was a literal sin against God.
There's a quote that perfectly captures the reality of the situation. He's the leader because people actually believe he is descended from the gods, and to disobey him is to subvert the will of the gods. You see, power wasn't just about having the biggest army or the sharpest weapons. To truly rule, you needed a commonly accepted mythology that created a shared reality the entire society agreed upon. The king rules because the people truly, deeply believe that to disobey him is to subvert the will of the universe itself.
And it's amazing to see how this builds across history. This divine claim was, hands down, the ultimate societal tool. It brilliantly justified the massive economic inequality that naturally emerged when societies settled down. It completely condemned rebellion. And even thousands of years later, in post-Reformation Europe, you have figures like King James I of England and Bishop Bossuet in France still using this exact same playbook, calling kings God's lieutenants upon earth. It functioned as this incredibly powerful shield to protect the emerging managerial ruling class from the masses.
Section 5. The Mechanics of Power, how the crown was actually built. Let's break down the exact sociological blueprint of how the crown was actually built from the ground up. Because how did the first king become king? Well, it really happened in 3 distinct steps. Step 1. Agriculture. Farming completely ends the autonomous hunter-gatherer lifestyle and forces people to settle together in huge numbers. Step 2. A managerial class emerges. Someone has to organize the massive construction projects, the farmers, the wealth, all of it. And this class naturally starts siphoning off resources for themselves. Then, step 3, mythology is invented. To prevent all those workers from rising up against this brand new inequality, a royal ideology, a divine right, is specifically crafted to legitimize the ruler's absolute authority.
And guys, this system was incredibly resilient. What is truly mind-blowing about this history is that in ancient Egypt, the empire's power structures physically collapsed multiple times over a period of 3,000 years. Yet, the cultural memory of divine kingship was so deeply ingrained in their society that they literally never tried a different political system. They just kept rebuilding the exact same structure of divine rule, generation after generation.
So the core thing you should take away from this explainer is that the first king didn't just invent power. Actually, scratch that. It's more like power invented the king. Think of it like a giant puzzle. First came food, which brought wealth and cities. That crazy density brought conflict and a desperate need for extreme organization. That organization required administration, which had to be backed by deep mythological belief. And finally, sitting right at the very top of that massive societal pyramid was the crown.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. Today, we live in a world where we've largely replaced ancient kings with modern presidents and prime ministers. But when you really look at how human beings organize themselves, how much of today's political power still relies on the exact same mechanics of collective belief? Does power exist because of the person holding it, or simply because we all collectively agree that they have it? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.